In the countryside of Surrey stood an ancient mansion called Stoke Moran. Once, it had belonged to one of the wealthiest families in England, but time, misfortune, and generations of reckless men had reduced the grand estate to a decaying shell. Its walls had darkened with age. Its windows stared across the grounds like empty eyes. And at night, when the wind passed through its ruined chambers, the house seemed to breathe. 2 years before Sherlock Holmes became involved in its secrets, a young woman had died inside one of its locked bedrooms. There had been no intruder, no visible injury, no trace of poison, only a burnt match in her hand, a strange whistle in the darkness, and 2 final words spoken in terror: the Speckled Band. It was early April in the year 1883. London had not yet fully awakened when Sherlock Holmes stood beside Dr. Watson's bed in their rooms at 221 B. Baker Street. Holmes was normally a late riser. The fact that he was fully dressed at 7:15 immediately told Watson that something unusual had happened. A young woman had arrived downstairs. She was frightened, exhausted, and unwilling to leave without speaking to Holmes. Within minutes, Watson had dressed and joined his companion in the sitting room. The visitor sat near the window, dressed entirely in black. A thick veil concealed her face, and her gloved hands trembled in her lap. Mrs. Hudson had lit the fire, yet the woman continued to shiver. Holmes quickly understood that it was not the cold that disturbed her. It was fear. When the woman lifted her veil, Watson saw someone who appeared much older than her years. She was barely 30, but streaks of grey ran through her hair. Her face was pale and strained, and her restless eyes carried the expression of an animal that had been hunted for too long. Her name was Helen Stoner. Before Helen could explain her situation, Holmes quietly studied the details of her appearance. A return ticket remained tucked inside her glove. Fresh mud marked the left sleeve of her coat in 7 places. From those small signs, Holmes concluded that she had left home before sunrise, traveled along wet country roads in a dog cart, reached a railway station, and taken the first train to London. Helen was astonished, but Holmes calmly showed her that what appeared miraculous was merely observation followed by logic. That brief demonstration gave Helen enough confidence to tell him why she had come. She had no money to offer him immediately. Within a few weeks, however, she expected to marry and gain control of part of her inheritance. Holmes had little interest in payment. An unusual problem was reward enough for him. And Helen's problem was unlike anything Watson had heard before. Helen lived at Stoke Moran with her stepfather, Dr. Grimesby Roylott. The Roylotts had once controlled enormous estates across Surrey, Berkshire, and Hampshire, but 4 generations of wasteful heirs had destroyed the family fortune. By the time Grimesby Roylott reached adulthood, almost nothing remained, except a few acres of neglected land and the 200-year-old mansion, buried beneath debt. Roylott refused to accept poverty quietly. He borrowed money from a relative, obtained a medical degree, and traveled to India. In Calcutta, his skill and forceful personality helped him establish a successful medical practice. But beneath his intelligence lived a violent temper. After discovering thefts in his household, Roylott beat his Indian butler to death. He narrowly escaped execution and spent years in prison. When he was finally released, he returned to England embittered and dangerous. During his time in India, Roylott had married Helen's mother, the widow of a Bengal artillery officer. Helen and her twin sister Julia had been only 2 years old at the time. Their mother possessed a considerable income. Her will allowed Roylott to control the money while the family remained together, but it required him to provide each daughter with a substantial yearly allowance after marriage. 8 years before Helen's visit to Baker Street, her mother had been killed in a railway accident near Crewe. After her death, Roylott abandoned any plan of rebuilding his medical career in London. He took Helen and Julia to Stoke Moran and withdrew from society. At first, neighbouring families had welcomed the return of a Roylott to the old estate. Their enthusiasm did not last. Roylott rejected every invitation. He rarely left the grounds except to quarrel with someone from the nearby village. His rage soon became legendary. He fought with neighbors. He threatened tradesmen. He appeared repeatedly before local magistrates. Only a week before Helen came to London, he had seized a blacksmith and thrown him over a bridge into a stream. Helen had been forced to use her own money to prevent another public prosecution. Roylott's enormous physical strength made his anger even more terrifying. No servant remained at Stoke Moran for long. Helen and Julia had been forced to maintain the old house themselves, living in isolation beneath the control of a man they feared. Roylott had only 2 interests outside his home. The first was a group of wandering gypsies whom he allowed to camp on the estate. The second was his collection of exotic Indian animals. A cheetah and a baboon wandered freely through the grounds. The villagers feared them almost as much as they feared their owner. Years of anxiety had transformed both sisters. Julia's hair had begun to turn white before she reached 30. Then, 2 years before Helen sought Holmes's help, Julia had become engaged. And shortly before her wedding, she had died. Helen and Julia had an aunt named Honoria Westphal who lived near Harrow. Their visits to her home were among the few opportunities they had to escape Stoke Moran. During one Christmas visit, Julia met a half-pay major of Marines. Their relationship developed quickly, and before returning home, Julia had agreed to marry him. Dr. Roylott raised no formal objection. But less than 2 weeks before the wedding, Julia died under circumstances no one could explain. The inhabited section of Stoke Moran contained 3 bedrooms along the same corridor. The first belonged to Dr. Roylott. The second belonged to Julia. The third belonged to Helen. Each bedroom opened into the corridor, and each had a window facing the lawn. On the night of Julia's death, a violent storm had struck the estate. Roylott had gone to his room early, but the smell of his strong Indian cigars passed into Julia's chamber and made it difficult for her to sleep. Julia went to Helen's room, and the sisters spoke for some time about the approaching wedding. Shortly before 11, Julia prepared to leave. Before returning to her own room, she mentioned something that had disturbed her during the previous few nights. At approximately 3 in the morning, she had repeatedly awakened to the sound of a low, clear whistle. She could not determine whether it came from the lawn or from somewhere inside the house. Helen had never heard it. She suggested that the whistle might have come from the gypsies camping on the estate. Julia appeared willing to accept the explanation, but uneasiness remained in her expression. She returned to her bedroom and locked the door. Both sisters locked themselves in at night because of the cheetah and baboon wandering outside. Helen could not sleep. The storm shook the old mansion. Rain struck the shutters, and the wind moaned through the damaged wings of the house. A sense of approaching disaster settled over her. Then, through the sound of the storm, a woman screamed. Helen recognized her sister's voice immediately. She jumped from bed, wrapped herself in a shawl, and ran into the corridor. As she opened her door, she believed she heard the same low whistle Julia had described. A moment later came another sound, a metallic clang. Something heavy appeared to have fallen or snapped shut. Julia's bedroom door slowly swung open. For several seconds, Helen stood frozen in the passage, staring into the darkness beyond it. Then Julia emerged. Her face was white with terror. Her hands reached blindly into the corridor. Her body swayed as though she could no longer control it. Helen caught her, but Julia collapsed. Terrible convulsions twisted her limbs. Every muscle in her body appeared locked in pain. For one brief moment, Julia seemed to recognize her sister. She tried to explain what had happened, but all she could say was that it had been the band. The Speckled Band. She attempted to add something more. Another convulsion seized her before she could finish. Helen called for help. Roylott emerged from his room wearing a dressing gown. He poured brandy between Julia's lips and sent for the village doctor. Nothing could save her. Julia Stoner died without regaining consciousness. The official investigation was thorough. Dr. Roylott's reputation was already known throughout the county, and the coroner treated the death seriously. But every physical fact appeared to make murder impossible. Julia's door had been locked from the inside. The windows were protected by heavy shutters and iron bars. The walls were solid. The floor showed no opening. The chimney was too narrow and had been blocked with metal staples. No one could have entered or escaped. There were no wounds on Julia's body, no marks of violence. No known poison was discovered. The only unusual objects found near her were a matchbox and the burnt remains of a match. Julia had clearly heard or seen something in the darkness and had struck a light. Whatever she saw had terrified her. Yet it left behind no evidence. The coroner could not determine the cause of death. Helen eventually convinced herself that her twin had died from shock. She wondered whether Julia's final words referred to the spotted scarves worn by the gypsies on the estate. But the explanation never satisfied her. For 2 years, Helen continued living alone with Roylott. Then her own circumstances changed. A long-time acquaintance named Percy Armitage proposed marriage. Helen accepted, and the wedding was planned for the spring. Once again, Roylott appeared to raise no objection. Soon afterward, supposed repairs began in the inhabited wing of Stoke Moran. Workmen broke through part of the wall beside Helen's room. The damage forced her to move temporarily into Julia's old bedroom, the same room in which her sister had died. The bed had not changed. The shutters remained the same. The corridor outside was as silent as ever. Then, during Helen's second night inside the room, she awakened in darkness. From somewhere nearby came a low, clear whistle. The same whistle that had preceded Julia's death. Helen did not return to sleep. At first light, she dressed quietly, escaped from the house, hired a dog cart, and traveled to London. Her marriage was approaching. She had been moved into her dead sister's room, and the sound had returned. Helen believed that whatever had killed Julia was now coming for her. Holmes listened without interrupting. When Helen finished, he asked whether she had told him everything. She insisted that she had. Holmes then reached toward the lace surrounding her wrist and gently pulled it back. 5 dark bruises marked her skin, 4 fingers and a thumb. Someone had gripped her with tremendous force. Helen quickly covered the marks. She attempted to excuse her stepfather, claiming that he sometimes failed to understand his own strength. But Holmes understood something more troubling. Even while seeking help, Helen remained afraid to accuse Roylott openly. Years of intimidation had taught her to minimize his cruelty. Holmes told her that the matter could not wait. He and Watson would travel to Stoke Moran that afternoon and inspect the bedrooms while Roylott was away in London. For the first time that morning, some of the tension left Helen's face. She departed Baker Street with instructions to expect them later that day. After she left, Holmes and Watson considered the case. A locked bedroom, a whistle at night, a metallic sound, a dying reference to a speckled band, gypsies living on the grounds, and a violent stepfather whose financial position would worsen if his stepdaughters married. The theory involving the gypsies appeared possible, yet too many details did not fit. Holmes needed to see the house. Before he could continue the discussion, the door of the sitting room flew open. A massive man filled the doorway. He wore a black top hat, a long coat, high gaiters, and carried a hunting crop. His shoulders nearly touched both sides of the frame. His face had been burned yellow by years beneath the Indian sun, and deep lines of rage covered his features. His eyes were sunken and bloodshot. His thin nose curved downward, giving him the appearance of a predatory bird. He was Dr. Grimesby Roylott. He had followed Helen to London. Roylott demanded to know what his stepdaughter had told Holmes. Holmes refused to be intimidated. Instead of answering, he calmly commented on the weather and the early spring flowers. The deliberate lack of fear infuriated Roylott. He accused Holmes of interfering in private matters. He called him a meddler, a busybody, and a servant of Scotland Yard. Holmes merely smiled. The quieter Holmes became, the louder Roylott grew. Before leaving, Roylott stepped toward the fireplace and seized the heavy iron poker. With both hands, he bent the metal into a curve. He threw it down and left Holmes with a warning to stay away from Stoke Moran. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Holmes picked up the bent poker. He was leaner than Roylott and possessed none of the doctor's enormous bulk. But with a sudden controlled effort, Holmes straightened the metal again. Roylott's threat had not frightened him. It had confirmed the seriousness of the investigation. Holmes now knew that Roylott was watching Helen closely. He also knew that a man capable of bending iron might be capable of far worse. Before leaving London, Holmes visited Doctors' Commons and examined the will of Helen's mother. The financial details revealed the motive. At the time of her death, Mrs. Stoner's investments had produced nearly £1,100 each year. Falling agricultural prices had since reduced that income to approximately £750. Under the terms of the will, each daughter would receive £250 annually after marriage. If both daughters married, Roylott would lose most of the income supporting him. Even one marriage would cause him severe financial difficulty. Julia had died shortly before her wedding. Now Helen was engaged, and immediately afterward, false repairs had forced her into Julia's bedroom. For Holmes, coincidence had begun to look like design. The danger was no longer theoretical. Before traveling, Holmes asked Watson to bring his revolver. A firearm, he observed, could be a useful argument against a man capable of twisting steel.